Canada on the verge of breaking with the U.S.? Relations between the United States and Canada, traditionally warm partners, have noticeably escalated after a series of provocative actions on the part of the Donald Trump administration. Back in 2018, the U.S. imposed tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, arguing that it was protecting national security. The decision sparked a flurry of criticism in Ottawa. Justin Trudeau, Canada's Prime Minister, did not stand idly by, calling the U.S. action a slap in the face to the partnership, and announcing retaliatory measures that could include duties on oil and uranium, two key Canadian exports to the U.S. In parallel, Trump has repeatedly allowed himself to make scathing comments, including a proposal to make Canada the 51st state of the United States. The Canadian government has taken such statements not just as a joke, but as a signal of distrust in bilateral dialogue. The situation is exacerbated by the U.S. decision to renegotiate the provisions of NAFTA, which has negatively affected the economic balance in the region. The imposition of duties on oil and uranium could become a real challenge for the U.S. energy industry, given that Canada is the largest supplier of these resources to the U.S. An escalation in relations with China? On another front, Trump has once again stepped up his criticism of China, accusing the country of facilitating the supply of fentanyl to the U.S. According to U.S. authorities, much of this synthetic opioid, which is exacerbating the drug abuse crisis in the U.S., comes through smuggling channels, allegedly involving Chinese manufacturers. In response, China has categorically denied the allegations. Lu Pengyu, a spokesman for the Chinese Foreign Ministry, recalled that Beijing has been actively cooperating with the U.S. in the fight against drug trafficking, especially since the meeting between Xi Jinping and Joe Biden in 2023. China has been sharing information on investigations and operational activities, he said, and urged the U.S. to refrain from making baseless accusations that undermine joint efforts. However, Trump threatened to impose new duties on Chinese goods, sparking further backlash. Against the backdrop of a post-pandemic global economic recovery, such a decision could deal a major blow to both China and the U.S., disrupting supply chains and increasing inflationary pressures. Is the world order at risk? The situation between the U.S., Canada and China reflects a broader trend of geopolitical fragmentation. If Canada does impose duties on oil and uranium, it could trigger a new trade war. Simultaneously, economic sanctions against China risk exacerbating the rift between the world's two largest economies. The world is watching these developments with growing concern. How long will U.S. partners tolerate such policies? Is China ready to respond to economic threats with a tougher response? And most importantly, where will this game lead if no one steps up? Will world leaders be able to put the interests of their nations ahead of ambition? What is Canada's role in this new balance of power? And is this the beginning of the end of the old world order? The answers to these questions could determine the future for generations to come. Canada's response: electricity and oil as leverage against the U.S.? In response to Donald Trump's possible imposition of high duties on Canadian imports, Canada has begun to make threats that could significantly affect energy supplies to the U.S. In November 2024, a senior Canadian official, Ontario Premier Doug Ford, warned that Canada was prepared to retaliate if Trump carried out his threat. Specifically, Ford hinted at the possibility of cutting off electricity supplies to U.S. states such as Michigan, New York and Wisconsin, which sparked heated discussions in both countries. Ford emphasized that Canada could use every tool in our arsenal to affect the U.S. economy in response to the threat of a 25% duty on Canadian imports. Americans would be hurt, and that would be unfortunate, he said, hinting at possible inconvenience to U.S. consumers and businesses. Despite the threats, however, experts say a complete cutoff of oil and electricity supplies looks unlikely given the close relationship between the two countries' economies. Canada is a key supplier of electricity to the United States, especially for regions such as New England and the Pacific Northwest, where energy shortages are common. In 2023, the United States imported 38.9 million megawatt-hours of electricity, most of which came specifically from Canada. Still, measures such as halting electricity exports could cause temporary energy supply problems in the United States. Analysts note that at certain stages, such as during periods of peak consumption, Canadian electricity becomes an important source of support for U.S. states. Oil. A strategic weapon. A more serious threat to the U.S., however, is the loss of Canadian oil. In 2023, the U.S. imported 1.4 million barrels of Canadian oil per day, more than half of all oil entering the country. For many U.S. petrochemical plants, especially in the Midwest and Great Lakes regions, Canadian oil is a key ingredient for making gasoline, diesel and jet fuel. Cutting off Canadian oil supplies could cause higher prices and fuel shortages in some regions of the United States. However, Canada's economy is heavily dependent on oil exports to the U.S., making such measures less likely. The loss of Canadian oil would also hit Canada as it is an important source of revenue, said Robert Yodger, an analyst at Mizuho Securities. Amid such threats, analysts tend to believe that Canada can use other leverage, such as aluminum or nickel supplies, rather than going for extreme measures in the oil sector. Especially in light of the realization of the Trans Mountain Pipeline, which opens Canada to alternative markets in Asia, such as Japan and South Korea. Canada's influence on the U.S. energy supply remains significant, but Canada is unlikely to use this as a means of pressuring its largest trading partner. The economies of both countries are highly interdependent, and even in the event of tensions, the use of such measures would have long-term consequences for both sides. However, these developments raise important questions. Will Canada be willing to use tougher measures if the situation continues to escalate? How will the U.S. respond to threats, and will it be able to quickly adapt to changing oil and energy supplies? We look forward to continuing this hot topic. Our new videos are waiting for you. See you there. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel.